Today I'm finally returning to a series that I began reviewing at the very start of this year. I've only just managed to continue with this series, Gentlemen Bastards by Scott Lynch. I'm surprised it took me so long to get back to this series because I really did enjoy that first book, and the second book, which I'm going to talk about today, Red Seas Under Red Skies, I loved even more than the first one. In fact, I've already bought the third book, so hopefully I'll get through that much quicker this time and we can continue talking about this great series. Part 1. Summary. It is 2 years since Locke Lamora and Jean Tannen fled Comore. They now live in the island city of Talvarar, with new secret identities as professional gamblers at an opulent casino named the Sin Spire. True to their real identities, Locke and Jean have been constantly cheating at games within the Sin Spire, despite its policy that anyone caught cheating at games will be killed, regardless of their status. Locke and Jean begin to plot a big scam at the Sin Spire, which is interrupted when they are captured by the Archon of Talvarar, Maxilin Stragos, who tricks them into drinking a poison that will kill them within 2 months if periodic antidotes are not taken. Once again, Locke and Jean find themselves dragged into the political machinations of the rich and the powerful. Part 2. A fresh start. Quick warning before we get into the meat of this. There are going to be spoilers for the first book in the series, so if you haven't read the first book, please don't watch any more of this video, unless you don't care about spoilers, in which case, watch away. So, big spoiler, in the Lies of Locke Lamora, basically all of the main characters who were part of the Gentlemen Bastards died, with the exception of Locke and Jean, and also Sabitha, who is Locke's love interest, who actually hasn't turned up in the books yet. Now that was quite a big shock reading the first book, because, you know, a big part of the main cast gets wiped out by the end of the book, which doesn't happen all that often. Now, because of things like Game of Thrones and the whole grimdark movement within fantasy, it is becoming more common to kill off main characters in books, but this can go very badly. One of the biggest risks, I think, in killing off main characters is that if you spend a whole book building up interesting characters with complex relationships, and then you kill a lot of them, and then in the next book, the reader is going into that book with the expectation that these new characters have to be just as good, or if not better, than the ones from the first book. And unfortunately, it does happen sometimes that when people take these risks in killing characters off in a book, the replacement characters are sometimes not as well liked, and they're not as good as the ones from the previous book. So this book had the expectations of getting these new characters right. Another big risk that this book took was changing the location of the story as well. This book isn't set in Comore, it's set in Talvarar, which is a very different place with a very different feel and style from that of Comore. Now, when I was reading reviews for this book, the negative reviews tended to focus on these two things. Some people were saying, you know, the characters just aren't as good this time around, and other people were saying that they really liked Comore as a place, they enjoyed its politics, its atmosphere, its culture, and they just didn't really care or dig the new setting. Now for me, I am the complete opposite. I really enjoyed both the new characters and the new location, and in a lot of ways I liked them even more than I liked the characters and the location of the first book. Perhaps one of the biggest changes from the first book is that a substantial part of this book actually takes place at sea. Most of it, Locke and Jean are on a pirate ship, and so it's got this kind of naval piratey quality to it, which again was something in some reviews that people didn't like. They didn't like that setting, but I think it just gave a freshness to the story and it made it way more interesting than if it had just been very similar things that were happening in the first book. In fact, the opening of the book where Jean and Locke are trying to do this heist at the Sin Spire, it does feel like, are we getting a bit of a retread of old ideas here where they're just going to go around, you know, scamming people and stuff like that. But then this stuff gets cut off when they have to go and deal with the Stragos guy, and they have to do what he wants, and they go to these pirates, and you get these pirate characters who are also really great, and just this complete change of direction in terms of the setting, the place, and the fact that Lynch was able to do that, to have this drastic change in location and style, while still keeping the basic the basic premise of the story the same. So overall, I did think Lynch did succeed in avoiding the two problems when it comes to killing off characters and changing the location of your series. He created new interesting characters, which we'll talk about more in the next two sections, and he managed to come up with a new plot in a different context, in a different place, that, you know, still felt very much like the world that he created in the first book, but is also new and fresh. So I think that was really impressive, and was one of the things that I enjoyed the most about this book. Part 3. Romance and friendship. So one of the best parts of this series, across all the books so far, and one of the things that people tend to focus on when they're praising the book, is the friendship between Locke and Jean. Now, since this is something that gets talked about quite a lot, I don't want to focus on it too much in this review, but I will say that it is, again, one of the best parts and definitely the grounding force of this book. In fact, I would go so far as to say that while their friendship was there in the first book, it was also kind of mixed in with the friendships with the other gentleman bastards. Whereas in this book, because they aren't there, because they're dead, that means that we actually get to spend more time with just these two developing a more intimate relationship with each other, and it just gives them a lot more depth. I'm thinking here especially of the early parts in the book where Locke is very much still in grief for the loss of his friends, and Jean is doing his best to try and, make things better, to kind of move on, to, get the old shenanigans going. And there's this resistance between them, whereas Locke just wants to be destructive and Jean wants to be constructive, and they just bat heads over this. And it just gives such a depth and beauty to their relationship, and it's just not something you see very often in fantasy literature, this kind of really heavy focus on personal friendships as opposed to romance. But it's not just the core friendship between Locke and Jean that is done really well in the book. I'm thinking here especially of the relationships that Locke and Jean form with the pirates on the ship that they join. For Jean especially, this actually means he gets a love interest. And this is the sort of thing that in a book that's primarily about friendship, when the love interest comes in, it can be a thing that then makes that friendship kind of go by the wayside. And the book does talk about this in terms of the plot, like they think about this, the two of them together, how is this going to change our friendship? And again, that was great, because what it was rather than the narrative of the story spending too much time on that romance and ignoring the friendship, it was instead the characters themselves having that discussion and thinking, how is our future going to be now that I'm with someone who I want to commit to? And I thought that was really well done. It was kind of this, first of all, this great romance blossoming between Jean and his love interest, and then also seeing how that affects the core friendship in the story. I thought that was great, and again, it just added an extra dimension to their friendship, which at this point is, already incredibly complex and interesting. In this review, I'm not really going to talk about the plot that much. What I will say here very briefly is that I thought the plot, like with the first book, it was a complex, fun, interesting plot. You have multiple storylines. So there's the stuff going on with the heist at the Sin Spire, then there's the stuff with Stragos and the pirates, and all of this coalesces together in a really cool way, just like the various plot threads in the first book did. But I do want to bring this in now just to say that it's impressive to me how well Lynch can do an interesting, complex plot and really good character work without sacrificing one or the other. A lot of the time, with fantasy and with books in general, you seem to get books that are kind of plot-focused, and so the characters kind of fall subservient to the plot, or the other way around, where it's the characters, and so you never really get a satisfying plot. Lynch not only does both of these things really well, but in terms of the plot especially, what I like is, even though this is a series of books, at the end of the books, it still feels like the story could come to a conclusion here. Even this book, it does have a sort of cliffhanger at the end, but you could sort of end the series there and have it kind of be an ambiguous ending. Like, the plot itself seems to resolve, and there are some loose ends, but it feels very satisfying to stop there, as opposed to maybe some other books where it feels very much like there is more to tell, you can't just stop the book there, like Game of Thrones, an example. But so it is nice that you have a series like that where it's an ongoing series that's not finished, but you can read each book and feel like if the series was to end here, then I would be satisfied with this, even if I would be hankering for some of these unresolved questions, and in this case, cliffhangers to be resolved. Part 4. Even better characters. So I want to bring things back now to characters again, so I can talk about them in a bit more detail. So as I said, when I was looking at negative reviews of this book, a thing that people seemed to complain about the most was just not hitting it off with the characters in this book, and really missing the Gentlemen Bastards as a group from the first book. And I'm just going to have to say that I disagree with the people who prefer the characters from the first book, because I think the characters in this book, well, I mean, I'm not saying the characters in the first book were bad, because they weren't, but I think the characters in this book were light years better than the ones in the first book. With regards to the other Gentlemen Bastards, aside from Locke and Jean, I did feel like that they felt like disposable characters to me. They didn't have the depth that Locke and Jean had, and a lot of them seemed to fit into the kind of stereotypes that you would get in this kind of setting, where you've got this band of criminals, and there's the smart one, and the dumb one, and the, all that kind of crap. So, I didn't really find them as interesting as the main two characters. I also felt similarly with Nazca from the first book. Now, with her and with the other Gentlemen Bastards, there was potential there for them to be interesting, But in Nazca's case, she was killed off way too early in the book for her to have as much of an impact as she could have had. And with the other characters, I just didn't feel like they kind of got out of being more stereotypical. Now, I'm not saying that those characters should have lived, that's not what the complaint is. It's more just that maybe because in Lynch's mind he was killing these characters off, he didn't put as much work into them, or maybe he's just developed his writing skills and so he's much better at doing secondary characters now. Because in this book, even characters that die in this book, and there are a few, even those characters are, in my view, much better done than the characters from the first book. They don't seem to be falling into stereotypes, and they have enough time in the narrative to at least blossom or show some depth and some dimension to them, so that when they die, it just has more of an impact. Particular favourites of mine are Salendri and Requiem, who are the leaders of the Sin Spire. They are a just beautiful, dark power couple, and Lynch is able to give them a backstory that makes them somewhat sympathetic, explains why they're so twisted, and which is great because you see why they're horrible, you empathise with them, but you also still hate them. And so to be able to bring that all out is great. And I always love a kind of dark couple. I've always found that more interesting than a single bad guy all on their own. And another favourite of mine is Zamira, the leader of the pirates. There's some great character work with her, and I think her relationship that she develops with Locke, it's not a romantic relationship, but just their slowly coming to trust each other over time is excellently done. Again, it takes time, it's got depth to it, and she also has some great scenes with the other pirate captains too. She also has a great scene where she goes to see the other pirate captains, where she has a deliberation with them. And this is an example of how well Lynch has come in terms of developing these minor characters. Because we don't spend all that much time with these pirate captains, these leaders. And yet, in the time that we spend with them, Lynch is able to convey the different relationships that these captains have with Zamira, but also with each other. And he's able to get across how loyal they are to each other, what their morals are, what their values are. And to be able to do that in what's essentially just one scene, really, with quite a few characters, it's again just really impressive and shows you how far he's come in terms of his ability to write characters and do a lot in a very small amount of space. So overall, I just think that Lynch's character work, which was already stellar in the first book, is just getting even better in this next book. Especially in terms of those secondary characters, who I do think are just really such an improvement over the secondary characters in the first book. Part 5, Conclusion. So, Red Seas Under Red Skies basically takes everything from the first book, Lies of Locke Lamora, does it even better, puts it in a new context that keeps it fresh, but still maintains the same kind of dark but comedic vibe of the first book, and for that reason I think it's at least my favourite so far, and I'm also really looking forward to carrying on with this series, hopefully a lot quicker this time. It won't take a year for me to get round to reading the third book. I suppose it's a good thing that this book does have a bit of a cliffhanger, because that is going to encourage me a little bit to get started, find out what's going to happen there. Although I imagine, well, I don't want to do any spoilers, but I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the next book. Okay, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for updates for new videos. I post videos every Monday at 4 PM. Also let me know in the comments, what do you think of Red Seas Under Red Skies? Do you prefer it to the first book, or do you think the first book's better? And also, without giving me any spoilers, do you think, based on the things that I've said, whether I will enjoy the third book, or if I might actually find that it's not as good, or it just ruins the whole series? Hopefully it won't do that. I'm pretty optimistic that this is going to be a good series. Hopefully all the way through, but at least for now. But anyway, that's enough rambling for me in this video. Take care everyone, and I'll see you all next time.